So, if you're early in gender transition, maybe even just questioning your gender for the very first time, maybe not even sure if you want to transition, maybe not even sure if you're trans or non binary, you might be asking, what the hell do I do now? Where should I go from here? Well, of course, as we have talked about, as many people have talked about, there's no one correct way to approach something like gender transition. There are many different paths we can take, but a starting point that may be helpful for some of you is just taking time to write about, think about, reflect on, and explore your gender identity. But you might be saying, sure, that sounds great and all, but what does this actually look like? So I put together a series of questions to maybe help kickstart some of the, you know, gender brainstorming that, kind of help us figure out how we can deepen our understanding of, what our gender identity is, what our gender expression is, kind of just go through this reflection process, even just exploring like, what the heck is gender in general? What does it mean to me? What does it mean to the people around me? And, among other things, these questions are designed to help us like understand clarity towards those big questions like, am I trans? And if so, how do I know? There's not going to be like a definitive like answer these 5 questions and depending on your score, you're trans. These questions can kind of help prompt like, oh, this is helping me realize that maybe the gender identity everyone has been telling me that I have, the one that was, given to me at birth, doesn't really fit who I am. And now I can start exploring other possibilities. And of course, this is by no means an all-encompassing list of questions. This is just a relatively short video to kind of be a jumping off point. We can think of this as a springboard or diving board into a pool of possibilities if you want a super cheesy metaphor to guide your process. This is not all-encompassing because, among other things, gender is a process. Figuring out gender is a process. It involves time, energy, exploration, reflection, and just really trying out a lot of things. A lot of these things you may have been thinking about in your head, but maybe have not had the opportunities to really start like enacting them in your life. Like how do we take what's up in here and kind of put it out into your world? This is a journey and it's also your own unique journey. Myself and others can help provide guidance on this journey and also remind you that you don't have to do this alone and shouldn't have to do this alone. But ultimately, it's your unique experiences, your identities, your values, and more. These things will be what's most important to you in figuring out the answers to these questions. But without further ado, let's jump into some of these questions. Feel free to pause, reflect, come back to this video at multiple points, just kind of go through it live with me. You're probably not going to have a lot of time to like fully reflect on these questions in real time because I'm going to kind of go through them one after another. Some of these things I've kind of already prompted with the intro, but when you think of this thing called gender, what first comes to mind? And, we're not asking like, what's positive, what's negative, what's problematic, what's not problematic. Any and all of that's fair game. We're just thinking, what is the first thing? What are those first things that come to mind? Maybe when I think about gender, I think of the fact that I am a woman. Maybe when you think about gender, maybe the first thing that comes to mind is confusing. What are those kind of associations that your mind has with the word gender? Kind of taking a step further, how do you currently describe your gender? Whether, that's the gender that you're presenting as, that isn't aligned with, who you want to be affirmed as, or is aligned with who you want to be affirmed as. What labels would you put on this? What definitions would you put on this? Experiences, how do you express your gender? How does it currently show up and how do you interact with your gender? How does the world interact with you based on your gender? And yeah, there's lots of layers to those questions there. Thinking about like I describe myself as a transgender woman or a woman who happens to be transgender, kind of going further. We can think about like where are you currently at and where do you want to be? Do those things match up right now or are those things kind of in very different places? Because that can also be a key place of like, thinking before I transition, like the world sees me as a guy, but I'm thinking ahead. I do not want to grow old as a guy. this is going to be terrible. I'll probably kill myself. It's like life or death, literally. May sound dramatic, but I know a lot of trans people can relate to that experience. It's seeing that disparity of like where we're currently at and where we want to be, that can also help us figure out where we might go next. Do you feel like that gender you were assigned at birth, the gender that others have identified you as throughout your life, at least prior to transition, do you feel like that fits? Does it kind of fit, but not quite? Or does it not fit at all? Maybe a little bit of nuance in those questions there, but kind of teasing out of like, it completely doesn't fit, or there are pieces that fit and pieces that don't. What are some of those gender role expectations that have been placed upon you based on the gender people have seen you as? In my case, prior to transition, based on the world seeing me as a guy for so many years, for, 24 years, what were those expectations that came with that? And how easy or difficult is it for you to fit into those expectations? How painful or simple is it to enact those expectations? It's not going to be a clean answer of all or nothing, or all of them are great or all of them are terrible. What happens then if you don't fit neatly into those gendered expectations? It's probably not a good thing, depending on the person or people we're talking about. We're often punished for not fitting neatly into those expectations that other people have for us, especially around something that a lot of people hold so rigidly, like gender. I know I'm going through this kind of quickly. Again, take a moment if you want to pause the video, reflect, write down your thoughts. If there are things you want to like ask me about in the comments below, you can kind of write that down as you're going through the video and share at the end, or even share now before you finish the video. Go through this again at your own pace. These questions are meant to kind of just prompt some thoughts, some feelings, some directions. And if it feels overwhelming, take a break, take a step away, engage with what you can at this point in time. Are there like critical experiences, are very prominent memories that stick out for you that prompt you to question your gender? Like this memory I have at like the age of 3 of like trying on my mom's clothes for the first time, of like, this is something that really stands out to me as, maybe this is me just curious, maybe this is me exploring, who knows what that may have been, but it stands out to me. It's like just one of those experiences where maybe this is evidence that my gender that everyone assigned to me or thought I was doesn't quite fit who I am and who I want to be in this world. And that's okay. We just need to take the time to explore that and figure that out. And we can also unpack like, where do we fit within, the gender binary, where this idea of like people are men and women, that's kind of the binary understanding of gender, as opposed to the gender identities beyond the binary. Do you feel like you fit neatly within this, like identifying as a man or identifying as a woman? Or do you feel like you fall somewhere outside of that binary, identifying as non-binary, gender fluid, as not having a gender, like gender neutral, kind of figuring out like what feels like it fits. For a lot of people, it's going to be like, yeah, one of these binary genders fits or mostly fits for me. And there's going to be a lot of people who are like, there are pieces here that fit, pieces here that fit, and then pieces completely outside of that fit. And that can kind of help us start understanding. Labels and definitions can help us create an understanding for ourselves, but we don't have to put a label on our gender if it doesn't feel like there's one that perfectly fits. It's just kind of finding what are the pieces that make up who you are, and if that fits under an existing label, great. If it doesn't, fine. That doesn't mean you're any less valid in who you are. So there's kind of a lot of other questions that I have here, but I think I'll kind of put that as a stopping point for now. Thinking about, some of those early expectations or even current expectations, those gender roles, thinking about what has been placed upon you from birth up until now, especially if you haven't started transitioning. And where do you relate to this kind of expectation that everybody needs to identify as a man or a woman, which we of course know is not true, but there is that kind of social expectation from a lot of people and a lot of systems. that you need to fit into the binary. But many of you out there may not fit into the binary, and that's okay. But it's important to, start thinking about that. Like maybe we're trying to force ourselves to fit into a different box that still doesn't fit us. And we don't want to be doing that if we can avoid that. We went through a number of questions here. And like I said at the beginning, these are just some possible questions and reflections that we can go through. This again is a starting point, not the end all be all. And as a therapist, I would be very remiss to not also mention how helpful therapy can be. And with an inclusive and gender affirming therapist, of course, for having someone who can help you facilitate, exploration of some of these questions. Like if there are some things that are really sticking out to you in these questions, or other questions are even coming up for you, maybe take it to your therapist if you have one, or take it to a trusted friend or family member, take it to a supportive online forum if you're part of an online community, and just, again, remind yourself that you don't have to figure these pieces out for yourself. And it can be very overwhelming and isolating to try to do that yourself. It's a process and a journey. And, you know, we create chosen families and communities for a reason, to help us in the good times, the bad times, the easy and the difficult times. All of that being said, I would love to hear your thoughts on all of this in the comments below. Like, what are your reactions? What came up during this reflection exercise for you? Were there particular questions that really resonated with you? And if so, like, how did they resonate with you? Just where are you at in your process in exploring your gender? If any of you are maybe a little further along, what was helpful in exploring and kind of figuring out those puzzle pieces? Maybe even think like, what are some other questions that have come up for you or have been helpful in your reflection process? Let me know all of this and more down in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Be sure if you haven't done so already to hit those like, subscribe, and share buttons. And as always, Tipsy and I love you all. Greatly appreciate you. Bye for now.